Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure to have you all here, indeed an honor. Uh, I would like to welcome one of our board members, also our deputy chairperson, Ms. Christina Teichmann. Please step forward.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the office of the F.W. de Klerk Foundation, especially to those who are here for the first time. Today, we have the great pleasure of launching the 2024 Human Rights Report Card, compiled by Daniela Ellerbeck, manager of the Constitutional Rights Program and her team. Each year around the time of Human Rights Day, the Foundation releases such a report with the aim to assess the progress South Africa has made in terms of adhering to and promoting human rights as they are enshrined in our Constitution. For me personally, as a foundation has released quite a number of reports over the years, it becomes more and more interesting each year because we are now able to identify trends over time. So these reports are not just to be taken as snapshots, but they really indicate trends that we should take serious. This year marks the 65th anniversary of the Sharpeville massacre, which we commemorate each year with Human Rights Day on the 21st of March. Since then, especially since the dawn of democracy in 1994, some good progress has been made in terms of improving people's lives with housing, health services, education, social security, and so on. However, as we all know, many people in South Africa are still trapped in poverty, and the inequality in this country is higher than anywhere else in the world. But human rights are not just about providing tangible and measurable goods such as houses, building hospitals, or giving out social grants. Human rights address deeper issues, often not visible to the eye, such as dignity, feeling safe, feeling heard, feeling equal and valued in society. And last but not least, a feeling of optimism and having hope for a better future, not only for oneself, but also for the next generation. In this context, especially because we are often obsessed with quantitative measures and statistics, a quote by Albert Einstein is quite fitting. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I think that we should always keep in mind and let sink in. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Daniela and her team have undertaken the difficult task to gauge what progress South Africa has made last year in adhering to and realizing human rights, where we as a country have stagnated and where we have maybe gone backwards. The aim of this exercise is not to play the blame card. This is not our objective. Our objective is to raise awareness and to start a conversation with relevant stakeholders and the public at large. This brings me to my last point, to provide some background information about the F.W. de Klerk Foundation, especially to those of you who are not really so familiar with us. The foundation was established in 1999 by former President F.W. de Klerk. He was convinced that the Constitution and the rights and freedoms enshrined in it, and on which our democracy is based on, cannot be taken for granted, but that they have to be protected and promoted. The Constitution, often hailed as one of the most modern in the world, is in fact a living document and does have to adapt to new developments and circumstances in society. However, there are fundamental human rights as enshrined in the Bill of Rights that are non-negotiable, such as the right to life, safety, the right to education, housing, health services, language, cultural rights, property rights, clean water, and so on. Since its establishment, the Foundation has worked in different ways to protect and promote the Constitution. by sharing information about constitutional developments with relevant stakeholders and the public, by making submissions regarding new legislation to Parliament, and last but not least, by providing a platform such as this one today for informed debates and discussions. The Foundation's objective and mission is to make the Constitution a reality for all. We believe that only when people experience the value of the rights and freedoms enshrined in the Constitution in their personal life, then they are prepared to defend it. The Constitution is only as good as it is implemented and used as a guiding tool, a kind of compass for political decision-making. The Foundation, under the leadership of our Executive Director, Christoph van der Rede, has 3 programs. The Constitutional Right Program, managed by Daniela Ellerbeck and her team. The Constitutional Advancement Program, managed by Ismail Yusuf. And the Legacy Program and Archive with its Center for the Constitution Transformation of South Africa, managed by Brenda Steyn. And you currently are in the Center for the Constitution Transformation, and I would like to invite you to later have a look at our exhibition and also bring family, colleagues to see the exhibition and to get to know what happened in the late 80s until the dawn of democracy, because I believe it's really a success story. Please feel free to talk to each of the colleagues to find out more about the respective programs. And without further ado, I wish us all an interesting briefing and a fruitful discussion, and hand over to Christo. Thank you.
Friends, colleagues, please allow me to also acknowledge the presence of our other board members, Dr. Jeanette Luther, welcome. Also a lot of media present here today. Welcome to you all, and then also to our ambassadors over here, over there. Welcome to all of you. Then we've got also representatives from CAS, a big supporter of the foundation. So we really welcome you all, and we would love to hear what your thoughts are about this presentation. Now, Daniela has given me a speech, and I'm going to read the speech, but perhaps just my own thoughts. You know, our country, the whole world is sort of in a space where nothing makes sense anymore. It's almost, you know, the era of ideological or politics based on clear ideologies. That era, it seems to me, is gone. We live in an era where transactions and the transactional approach to politics is, you know, taking the lead in terms of whatever is happening out there in the world. And our job as the foundation is really just to say that we have problems in South Africa. We have challenges in South Africa. And how do we then analyze those problems and make sure that our government, our politicians, our political parties, our cabinet leaders, our presidency, but also ordinary people like us sitting here, you know, try to heed the call in terms of fixing these issues. Because everything can be translated back to our Constitution. Rassie Erasmus won't take a team to the World Cup without understanding the rules of the game. And he will make sure that every player that is part of that team knows exactly what to do and how to optimize each and every role that they have to fulfill. Without that, they might as well stay home and forget about the World Cup. And we have a constitution, we have a blueprint, we have got a Bill of Rights. And if you go through the history in this room, you'll see how everything has evolved from an apartheid state to a democracy. And in the second room, there you'll see an outline of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Beautiful words. South Africa belongs to all of us. South Africa is supposed to be a non-racial state. It's supposed to be a state where the rights of people are respected, where the rights of people will be nurtured in a way that it benefits the greater population. unfortunately, we have deviated from that blueprint. And the end result is a democratic state that is not in a good space. And that's the purpose of this exercise. How do we get our people, our country, back on course, back on track in terms of dealing with the issues that we highlight in this room? So thank you, Christina. As she mentioned, my name is Christo van Rede. I used to come from from a little village down in the West Coast. So forgive me when my English is sometimes not, sounding like the Queen of England. But be it as it may, I used to be a teacher, a school principal. I joined the private sector, the public sector, and now I am the executive director here. And we've got one mission. That mission is to really ensure that our constitution, our democratic dispensation, becomes a reality for all of our citizens, because they deserve it. So esteemed guests, dignitaries, board members, members of the media, and those joining us online, all protocols observed. Welcome to the F.W. Klerk Foundation's annual Human Rights Report Card launch. This card examines the state of South Africa's rights and freedoms during the 2024 calendar year, and that's important, from 1st of January to 31st of December 2024. This report is launched annually in honor of Human Rights Day, which falls on the 21st of March every year. And obviously, this Friday will be the 21st of March. Today's program will include this welcome address, followed by an explanation of the major developments in 2024 that impacted South Africa's rights and freedoms. We will then present two in-depth analysis of the team's findings on some of the most threatened rights, followed by closing remarks from myself as the director. And then we will have a question and answer session. We would like you to participate, because these problems affect everyone. The program will conclude most probably at 2 o'clock, after which we will have some drinks and some nice refreshments. So the foundation, ladies and gentlemen, engages in several key activities, including actively promoting the rights and freedoms enshrined in the South African Constitution. It also works towards national unity, and that's important. I want to emphasize national unity, non-racialism, reconciliation, and the accommodation of cultural and linguistic diversity in South Africa. And I think that's where a massive opportunity sits for South Africa. If we leverage that diversity, if we create value change for our different languages, if we create value change for cultural tourism, because people from wherever they come don't come to South Africa to come and visit the what is the castle there in London, the Windsor Castle. They come here to enjoy our fauna and flora, our diversity. Now, how do we make the most of that to really give people a sense of what South Africa is really about? So one of the most significant parts of the legacy is this constitution that we should all celebrate, we should all preserve. And it is for this reason the Foundation launched the Center of Constitutional Transformation of South Africa earlier this year. As you can see, the Center documents the process of how South Africa became a constitutional democracy, and we encourage you to undertake a self-tour of it later today and after the launch. The Constitution states that South Africa is one sovereign democratic state founded on values such as human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights. These human rights and freedoms are contained in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, ladies and gentlemen, is the cornerstone of democracy. In South Africa, it obviously enshrines the rights of people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. It applies to all law and binds the legislature in terms of also the executive, the judiciary, and all organs of state. It binds both natural and juristic persons. In short, it encapsulates the vision of justice for all. So we're very, very excited in terms of presenting these findings, and today we are honored. We have two of our interns, that is Shanice Kandu. Shanice, can you just raise your hand so that everyone can see you? And we also have Sonia Tongiwe. There she is, and they have done quite a lot of research. Remarkable young women that has done a lot of research, in-depth research, to give us a solid report. And under the guidance of Daniela, very hardworking, very dedicated, and also a person with an eye for detail. So thank you very much for your contribution. So you may ask yourself, what is the reason for this? As I've explained earlier, is really to just focus our attention on what is really important. That's our constitution. There's a lot of noise, a lot of political noise. People are grabbing each other by the throat, and this and that and the other. And we forget that we must actually play this game on the rugby field in such a way that we win this match. If we start becoming busy with each other, we're definitely going to lose. So, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps just to give you a bit of rundown on the methodology of this human rights report card, you will see each right and freedom entrenched in the Constitution. The Constitution's Bill of Rights is graded, much as you would grade subjects in a school report, on a basis of A for excellent, B for good, C for moderate, D for poor, and E very, very bad. I won't share my report card with you. If you turn to the Human Rights dashboard, in the printout you find on your seat, you will see the grades, each of the rights and freedoms received last year in the 2023 report card, compared with the 2024 report. You will also see the allocation of an equal sign, also a plus sign, and a minus sign. The allocation of an equal sign indicates no change in the right, a plus sign denotes an expected improvement, and a minus sign indicates a likely deterioration of the right. Now, I want to emphasize right at the start. You will ask yourself, but how did you get to this? And yes, obviously, we strive to be objective as possible. We do a lot of research that brings us to that conclusion, but no one, and being a teacher, being a school principal, you can never say that you that objective, because we live in a society where we should continue to challenge, to say, but is this really fair? Or is this really, can this really be substantiated? And that's the purpose of this exercise today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude. The grade allocation for each right is determined by examining the grade it received in the previous year and assessing the impact of the current year's political, economic, legal, and social developments on that right. For example, if the right of freedom of expression was graded as a C in 2023, and developments in 2024 indicate a decline in the enjoyment of that right, it would be downgraded to a C- for 2024. This approach helps us to understand how various factors positively or negatively affect the realization of rights. And obviously, there is a particular bias, and that bias obviously is in the eye of the person that do this research and come to that conclusion. But please, don't hang us for that. It is really for us to discuss and to be open-minded about what we try to achieve. So, ladies and gentlemen, the report card is but a tool to open discussions about the enjoyment of rights and freedoms. The rationale for the grade of each right of freedom received is explained at the bottom of the section covering each respective right of freedom. So thank you for your attentive consideration. I will now ask my colleague Daniela, who will discuss the major developments of 2024 that affected South Africans' rights and freedoms. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Christo. As Christo stated, I'm Daniela Illebek, an attorney and the Foundation's Constitutional Rights Program Manager. As Christo said, every year, the F.W. de Klerk Foundation assesses the degree to which rights and freedoms are being enjoyed as a lived reality. In doing so, the Foundation also considers how the government is meeting its obligations to protect, promote, fulfill, and respect all the rights and freedoms enshrined in the Bill of Rights. This report card enables South Africans and our leaders to gauge how well the country is doing in making the Constitution a reality for all. It is part of the Foundation's efforts to encourage citizens to engage in discussions about these important issues, because they should form part of our daily dialogue and constantly feature in the media we consume. When looking at how South Africa did with making its constitution a lived reality in 2024, it is important to look at the context that people were living in last year. For this reason, the report card, which you can download the full copy of by scanning this QR code in the printout in front of you. The report card starts with an examination of the top 2024 developments in the spheres of politics, the economy, the national budget, and social developments. First and foremost, let's delve into the political developments. In 2024, South Africa experienced the most transformative shift in politics since the dawn of democracy 30 years ago. This was when, during South Africa's 2024 national and provincial elections, the country's political landscape changed when the ANC, who had been in one-party rule since 1994, lost its majority at national level and in several provinces, managing to only secure 40.18% of the vote nationally. Now, this necessitated the formation of a coalition government nationally as well as in several provinces, because no single party won an outright majority, in other words, more than 50% of the seats. Now, the reason this necessitated coalition governments is because cooperation between political parties was suddenly necessary to pass proposed laws, in other words, bills, and to govern effectively. Coalitions thus became essential for stability and functional governance, both nationally and in the relevant provinces. 10 political parties united to form a government of national unity, or GNU, consisting of the African National Congress, the Democratic Alliance, the Patriotic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Good Party, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the Freedom Front Plus, the United Democratic Movement, Al-Jamaa, and Rise Mzansi. The fact that the GNU included parties that were traditionally seen as being ideological opponents is a significant shift in South Africa's political landscape. Its formation was instrumental in averting a political crisis and paving a way forward. The GNU, the second in South Africa's history, holds a supermajority. In other words, more than 2/3 or 66.6% of the seats in the National Assembly. Now, this means that this GNU can implement significant changes to laws, as well as change the Constitution, albeit not Section 1, which contains South Africa's founding values. Now, the coalition government faced significant challenges from the start. For example, they had to address the country's pressing issues, such as low economic growth, inequality, high unemployment, high crime levels, and they had to do all of this while learning how to work together and maintain political stability. The GNU's key priorities included A, driving inclusive economic growth and job creation, reducing poverty and tackling the high cost of living, and finally, C, building a capable, ethical, and developmental state. When it came to political stability, the GNU delivered, despite facing numerous internal tensions during 2024, for example, with regards to the implementation of the National Health Insurance Act, as well as when the President assented to the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. By the end of the year, the GNU remained intact and was using its internal conflict resolution mechanism, known as the GNU Clearinghouse Mechanism, to resolve disagreements amongst its political parties. The emergence of this coalition marked a watershed moment in South Africa's democratic evolution. It is a historic departure from uninterrupted majority rule by the African National Congress since 1994, and all of a sudden, our political parties had to work together for the good of South Africa. Considering economic developments in 2024, Negatively, South Africa continued grappling with significant challenges, such as a falling GDP per capita, high unemployment, widespread poverty and inequality, increasing public debt, and a shrinking tax base. Now, the International Monetary Fund, commonly known as the IMF, pointed out that South Africa's ineffective policies, its deep-rooted structural rigidities, and its governance problems, obviously this was prior to the GNU, had caused an erosion of South Africans' living standards, leading to the real income per capita falling for more than a decade. To put it in numbers, South Africa's real GDP for 2024 was only 1.1%, while South Africa's population growth was 1%. This means that the economy simply grew too slowly and barely outstripped the population growth, meaning it was too little to be effective to address the major issues such as unemployment, poverty, and income inequality. Inflation, measured as a CPI average, was 4.4%. Unemployment was approximately at 32.8% as an average for the year of 2024. The government's debt, in other words, public debt, was approximately 311.3 billion US dollars. Importantly, this is greater than 75% of South Africa's GDP. Now, the state's inability to restrict its spending has caused public debt to triple since the global financial crisis, from 25% in 2008 to 75% or more than 75% in 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an unsustainable situation. And income inequality, measured as a Gini coefficient, where a coefficient of 0 would mean complete equality and a coefficient of 1 would mean complete inequality, remained very high at 0.63. Importantly, South Africa has a shrinking tax base due to high unemployment and a desperate shortage of skilled workers in almost all sectors. Now, on the bright side, the country has a large youth population, with 15 to 34-year-olds making up approximately 20.85 million, or a third of the country's population. This means that South Africa has a large future generation who are ready to enter the workforce as taxpayers and remain in the workforce as taxpayers for a very long time. On top of that, they are in their prime stage of life to be upskilled and trained. However, despite the large size of the youth population, approximately 45.5%, so almost half of these 15 to 34-year-olds were unemployed in the first quarter of 2024. This is significantly higher than the national average for that same period, which was at 32.9%. Notably, the unemployment rate amongst graduates was 11.8% during that period. But according to the 2022 census, only 2.7% of 15 to 34-year-olds hold bachelor degrees from universities. So what does this tell us? This tells us that South Africa, to its own detriment, is failing to make good use of its demographic advantage, and even worse, it is failing its youth in providing them with quality education, skills, and a growing economy that creates jobs. Now, these economic issues limited the GNU's ability to spend on other important needs, such as education, because economic growth is necessary to allow more people to work and pay taxes. This increase in taxes can then be used by the state to improve public services such as education. This all emphasizes South Africa's urgent need for comprehensive economic reforms to stimulate the much-needed economic growth, as well as address the structural issues. Now, while the GNU successfully managed to address load shedding in 2024, and I believe we are all very grateful for that, disruptions to South Africa's rail system and our port operations remain, and these continue to inhibit economic growth. In short, ladies and gentlemen, economic growth is not an option and more taxes are necessary to make the Constitution a reality for all, because rights cost money. On a positive note, the government acknowledged the importance of private sector investment in addressing these economic challenges. Deputy President Paul Mashatile stated that privatization was not a swear word, saying that the GNU was seeking more foreign investment in energy, water, and infrastructure due to South Africa's constrained public finances. The GNU also launched several initiatives aimed at revitalizing the economy, such as green energy initiatives and infrastructure projects. Shifting our focus to the budgetary developments. Now, as most of you would know, South Africa's government's budget starts on the 1st of April and continues until the 31st of March the next year. So this means that for the period that the report looks at, namely from the 1st of January through the 31st of December 2024, there were two budgets involved. Now, from both budgets, it is clear that the biggest expenditure was on education, with a very poor return on investment being pointed out by many. This is followed by social development, which comes as no surprise, as approximately 45% of people received social grants from the government in 2024. And thirdly, by the government's debt service costs. Importantly, in his budget speech on the 21st of February 2024, the finance minister pointed out that the government's payments on its debts, i.e. its debt service costs, will use more than 20% of the government's revenue. So of all the taxes the government collects, a fifth, 20%, goes immediately just to pay government loans and the interest on those loans. Lastly, when we consider social developments that took place during 2024, we see that South Africans' happiness levels increased to 5.42 points according to the Happiness Index, which measures real-time sentiments of South Africans by monitoring their tweets. Happiness is measured with 0 being very unhappy and 10 being very happy. The fact that South Africans' happiness levels increased to 5.42 points is an increase from 5.19 points in 2021, but it is still below the world average of 5.56 points. Negatively, South Africa grappled with persistent issues such as high unemployment, inequality, and social unrests. So let's briefly examine each of these in turn. As already stated, the unemployment rate for 2024 remained critically high, averaging at approximately 32.8% for the year, worsening poverty and inequality. Now, since more unequal societies tend to have higher crime rates as well as lower social trust, unemployment also continues to increase social tension, such as xenophobic sentiments. In the words of former President de Klerk, peace does not fare well where poverty and deprivation reign. Xenophobia remained a pervasive issue in South Africa in 2024. The year commenced with Operation Dudula and the Patriotic Alliance Party preventing Zimbabweans without valid documentation from entering the country via the Bright Bridge border post. Now, videos of the vigilantes went viral, and xenophobic hashtags supporting their efforts surged on social media platforms. Anti-immigration sentiment was also present in South Africa's political rhetoric, particularly in the lead-up to the general elections that took place on the 29th of May 2024, with many political parties blaming immigrants for the country's woes. Then, of course, the deaths linked to contaminated food bought at spaza shops during the end of last year made news again, and the fact that many of these shops were owned by foreign nationals saw xenophobic statements rise again. Crime and corruption remained a major concern in South Africa throughout 2024. The country had a high crime index of 75.4 on a scale of 0 to 100, but this was on the lower side since 2017, so one does have to point that out. Importantly, South Africa had the highest crime in Africa, ranking as the 5th most dangerous country in the world. We would be remiss if we did not point out that the World Bank estimated in 2023 that South Africa loses approximately 10% of its GDP to crime annually. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is 10% of our GDP we can very ill afford at the present. Crime poses direct risks to the rights enshrined in the Constitution, including, but not limited to, the rights to life, and freedom and security of person, which my colleague Shanice Nakandu will talk about in depth later. To paint an overall picture of the crime trends that one could see from 2024, and these come from the official South African Police Service statistics, one can notice that there was a 12.2% decrease in the number of murder victims, but a 33.6% increase in the number of attempted murder victims. The number of assaults with intent to inflict grievous bodily harm, commonly known as assault GBH, so the number of assault GBH victims rose by 15.8%. And on the good news, the number of rape victims decreased by 4.5%. Again, these are all from the official South African Police Service statistics. Corruption continued to be a pervasive problem in South Africa, with the Corruption Perceptions Index for 2024 showing that South Africa's perceived corruption levels are at 41 out of 100. This is where a score of 0 shows a country is perceived as highly corrupt, and a score of 100 shows that it is perceived as very clean. Maladministration, fraud, employment irregularities, extortion, bribery, and procurement irregularities were all manifestations of this corruption problem. Naturally, the state's delivery of services is directly affected by this, with the World Bank noting in 2023 that the government's capacity was rapidly weakening due to corruption, especially at the local level. Crime and corruption are significant issues. They directly impact on our economic growth, which we need desperately, as well as on our reality as South Africans. From the team's assessment of the degree to which the rights and freedoms are being enjoyed as a lived reality, the Foundation found the following to be the top 10 rights that were most threatened. In order of descent: the right to access to healthcare, food, water, and social security; children's rights; freedom of trade, occupation, and profession; equality; the right to life; freedom and security of person; property rights; education; freedom of expression; and the right to privacy. Thank you for your attentive and kind consideration. I will now yield the floor to my colleague, Shanice Nakandu, who will provide an in-depth analysis of the team's findings of the right to life, equality, freedom and security of person, and freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Shanice Nkandu. I'm an LLB graduate from Wits University and one of the 2 interns who had the pleasure of being a part of this year's Human Rights Report Card project as part of the FW de Klerk's Constitutional Rights Program. My colleague Daniela mentioned the rights most under threat as listed in the Human Rights Report Card for this year. Today, I want to focus on the report card's findings as they relate to the right to equality, the right to life, threats to freedom and security of a person, as well as freedom of expression. In Section 9, the Constitution expressly states that the right to equality includes the right to equal protection and benefit of the law, the right not to be unfairly discriminated on various grounds by either the state or anyone else, as well as the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. So the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms is crux to the right of equality. In 2023, South Africa's right to equality was graded an E-, which equates to very bad and deteriorating. In 2024, nothing has changed. Reflected in the E equals grade to the right, as explained by Christo, an equal sign signifies that there has been no change from the previous year. The major factors that contributed to this are the bad policies, income inequality, persistent gender disparities in economic participation, as well as South Africa's continued struggle with crime, specifically gender-based violence. Many of these can be seen as systematic barriers that we as South Africans must actively work to change to achieve equality and true equality. Turning to income equality, one of the most pressing challenges in South Africa is in economic inequality. The IMF has expressed a concern that South Africa's pronounced income disparity hampers economic growth. It fuels social unrest, and it perpetuates a cycle of poverty. They emphasize the urgency of implementing reforms because without decisive action, inequality could further destabilize the nation's socio-economic landscape. As former President F.W. de Klerk mentioned, the enemy of peace is the failure to grasp the needs of the people. South Africa's pronounced economic inequality can be seen by the fact, rather, that South Africa's Gini coefficient is sitting on a 0.63. As Daniela explained again, a Gini coefficient is a measure that indicates income disparity, where 0 would signify perfect equality and 1 represents extreme inequality in terms of income disparity. Thus, with our Gini coefficient, South Africa remains one of the most unequal societies in the world. So why does South Africa have such a large income disparity? Unemployment seems to be the key driver, one of the main reasons for persistent income inequality. South Africa's unemployment rate remains at an alarmingly high 32.8% for the first quarter of 2024. Youth unemployment is even worse at 45.5%. Again, South Africa's GDP in 2024 was only 1.1%, which was barely outstripped by the population growth of 1%. The economy simply grew too slow to make a dent in unemployment. These figures are not just statistics. They represent millions of South Africans that are unable to access economic opportunities. They're entrapped in cycles of poverty. Particularly troubling is the fact that young women bear the brunt of this crisis, with an unemployment rate of 49.4%. This is half of all young women who are unemployed. But this is not just limited to young women. The labor force participation for women is also at 50.6%. This is significantly lower in terms of the 63.6% for men. Women also only earned 75.8% of what men earned for similar work, showing the persistent gender pay gap. Additionally, women remain underrepresented in leadership roles, occupying just 33.1% of managerial positions. These findings underscore the ongoing structural barriers that limit women's full participation in the economy. The lack of safety in South Africa also acts as a barrier to entry, preventing women from fully participating in the economy. This not only impacts negatively the realization of the right to equality, but also the right to freedom of trade, occupation, or profession as enshrined by the Constitution. Turning to the problematic policies. The enactment of the Employment Equity Amendment Act 2022 seeks to make changes to Employment Equity Act of 1998 by, amongst other things, empowering the Minister of Employment and Labor to determine numerical targets within economic sectors to ensure equitable representation. The Act is still to commence at the operation at the end of 2024. While this Act's intent might be to promote diversity and equality in the workplace, which aligns with constitutional principles, centralizing even the very detailed powers to the state may have unintended consequences, such as achieving the very opposite, undermining the workforce diversification and causing job losses, lowering economic growth, and increased unemployment. This is best illustrated by the ministers, the draft Employment Equity Regulations of 12th of May 2023, which I'll just refer to as the old draft regulations. The old draft regulations were published for public comment and sought to establish very detailed, rigid numerical goals for specific employment sectors. For example, there are targets as low as 0% and 0.1% for colored and Indian individuals in specific provinces. This caused some of these labels, or this label caused it to be known as quotas. Clearly, this is highly concerning because, number one, this would drastically limit South Africans who are from these racial groups causing them to have limited opportunity or no opportunity at all when it comes to being part of the job market in that province. Because unemployment for them in certain provinces would be a breach by a designated employer. Secondly, as can be seen in this example, the old draft regulations would only have achieved the exact opposite of the Act's intention to undermine workforce diversification. So while we need an open, equitable, and non-discriminatory economy, such an approach would only have caused job losses, lowered South Africa's already stagnant economic growth, and increased unemployment, as well as income inequality. On the 1st of Feb 2024, the minister published the new draft regulations containing sectoral targets for 18 sectors. Positively, the new draft regulations, in contrast with the highly contested old draft regulations, set only a single percentage target for designated groups, which is per sector and occupational level, differentiating only by gender and removing breakdowns by race. This is a much better balance between equity targets and sustainable employment practice, one that will not inadvertently deepen South Africans' distress. When it comes to the persistent struggle against crime, specifically GBV, the South African police statistic crimes show that in 2024, women and children remain affected by violent crime. Sexual violence is a persistent issue, although 2024 did see a decrease by 0.84% as compared to the previous year. However, underreporting remains a critical concern, with only 20% of women who suffer sexual abuse reporting it. The government's recent legislative reform seeks to strengthen protections for survivors. The number of female murders also decreased by 68, but still remaining at a high 3,812. This is almost 10.5 women who are being murdered every day in South Africa. The number of attempted murder victims was increased by 327, bringing the total number to 6,573. That is 18 women a day. Thankfully, the number of female assault GBH victims decreased by 1,044, as well as the number of female rape victims in domestic cases also decreased by only 3 women. This brings the total number of female assault GBH victims and female rape victims in domestic cases to 59,844 and 3,334 respectively. This is approximately 164 women who are assaulted with the intent to do GBH and harm, and just over 9 women who are raped as part of domestic violence every single day. Again, I wish to stress the failure to ensure a woman is safe is a fundamental barrier to her access to fully and participating in the economy as well as society. Without prioritizing security, equality remains an elusive goal. When it comes to the right to life, the overall murder rate in South Africa remains at an alarmingly high, with an average of 71.87 murders per day in 2024. There was also an increase in political assassinations, with at least 10 murders that were recorded between January and April 2024. It can be assumed that with the national elections that took place on the 29th of May 2024, the political campaigning and contestation that came with it were causally linked to this trend. For this and other reasons stated in the Human Report Card 2024, the right to life's full enjoyment remained very bad. In 2023, it was graded E-. In 2024, nothing has changed, reflected on the E = grade to the right. When it comes to the right to freedom and security of a person, the right includes, amongst other things, the right to not be deprived from freedom arbitrarily without just cause, not to be detained without trial, to be free from all other forms of violence from either public or private sources, and not to be tortured in any way, or not to be treated or punished in a cruel, inhumane, or degrading manner. Also protected is the right to bodily and psychological integrity, which includes, inter alia, the right to make decisions concerning reproduction. In 2024, we saw a 9% increase in kidnappings, bringing the total number for kidnappings to 17,859, which is almost 50 a day. Reports also indicate a 260% rise over the past decade. The provinces of Gauteng and KZN consistently remained the provinces with high instances rates. The kidnappings were often linked to ransom demands. For example, when Ngabayo Muzi Kwangwa, a member of parliament, was kidnapped in Cape Town and only released after his party, the UDM, paid a 10,000 Rand ransom. Ransom was consistently the main causative factor for kidnappings last year, followed by extortion and human trafficking. In addition to this, there was an emergence of a concerning trend known as express kidnappings, where victims were abducted and coerced into making immediate financial transactions under duress. The Independent Police Investigative Directorate stated that in its annual report for 2023-2024, that 273 cases of torture were reported to it. This is a significant increase from the 228 in the previous year. In 2023, the right to freedom and security of a person received a D- grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was poor and deteriorating. In 2024, the increase in factors that influence its enjoyment, which were torture, kidnapping, high murder rates of 70 murders per day, the nominal decrease of sexual violence, and an increase in assault GBH resulted in this right receiving an E grade, indicating that its full enjoyment is very bad. The right to freedom and security of a person must not remain a constitutional promise. It must be a lived reality for all. A nation that cannot protect its people is a nation that undermines its own future. Coming finally to the right to freedom of expression. Section 16 of the Constitution entrenches the right to freedom of expression, which explicitly includes freedom of press and other media, freedom to receive or impart information or ideas, freedom of artistic creativity and academic freedom, as well as freedom of scientific research. Such robust protection is given to this right, not only because it is essential to a multi-party system in a democratic government, but also because of South Africa's history as an apartheid state in which very heavy censorship was imposed on all. The Constitution specifically excludes propaganda for war, incitement of imminent violence, and the advocacy of hatred, which could be based on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, that constitutes an incitement to cause harm from protection. However, it allows the government to regulate this unprotected speech as it sees fit. In this context, that the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes Act Speech 2023, which I'll just refer to as the Hate Speech Act, was passed. It was signed into law in May 2024, but the date of commencement is still promulgated. The Act criminalizes, wider than mere hate speech, it sees as hate speech. If one is found guilty of an expression the Act sees as hate speech, it allows you to be sentenced up to 5 years imprisonment. The expressions in the Act which are considered as hate speech, simply put, are expressions that incite harm, promote or propagate hate, as well as against a group of people specifically listed in the Act. This Act was subjected to widespread debate due to its definition of harm, which includes subjective and vague concepts, such as emotional harm and social harm. However, its failure to also define hatred is also the most concerning. This, the Act's wide and vague definition of harm, and its failure to define hate, the element of crime of hate speech, results in the Act not only being contrary to the founding value of the rule of law, which requires laws to be clear, but also going wider than the Constitution in its effect, causing the Act to criminalize expressions that are constitutionally protected. Supporters have welcomed the Act, viewing it as a crucial step towards safeguarding vulnerable communities from hate-motivated offenses. Critics have also warned that the Act will have a chilling effect on free speech, as people will stay silent for their fear of imprisonment. Especially concerning are the Act's inadequate protections for journalists, academics, artists, and religious freedom, which are self-defeating as a result of a circular drafting. This offers very little protection for hate speech, which is explicitly protected by the Constitution, precisely because it is so important for the functioning and the health of a South African democracy. This and other developments covered in the report card saw that the right to freedom of expression received a C- grade for 2024, indicating that its full enjoyment was moderate but deteriorating. The fact that the Hate Speech Act is not yet in operation led to the right remaining at moderate as opposed to downgrading to a D, which is poor. Thank you for your active consideration. I'll now hand over to my colleague and fellow intern, Sonia Twingarewe.
Thank you so much, Shanice. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Sonia Twingarewe, an intern at the Foundation and enrolled in the BA Honors International Studies program in Stellenbosch University. Among the top 10 human rights most threatened, I will briefly discuss healthcare, food, water and social security, children, education, freedom of trade, occupation and profession, and property rights. First, let us consider healthcare, food, water, and social security. Section 27 of the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to access healthcare and healthcare services, including reproductive services, and not to be refused emergency medical treatment, sufficient food and water, and social security. It mandates the government to take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of each of these rights. Turning to healthcare, while notable hospitals exist in South Africa's public healthcare sector, the sector overall faces multifaceted challenges, such as the severe shortage of doctors. As pointed out by the Foundation in 2024, this is exacerbated by funding constraints, which left over 800 qualified medical professionals unemployed and prompted some skilled practitioners to emigrate. These persistent budget limitations hinder recruitment efforts, compounding the crisis in public healthcare facilities, which are already plagued by equipment shortages and medication deficits. It is in this context that the National Health Insurance Act 2023, also known as the NHI, became law on 15th May 2024. However, it must be pointed out that the Act is not yet in operation, with this date of commencement still to be proclaimed in terms of Section 59 of the Act. The Act is meant to provide universal access to quality health care, and its goal is to achieve universal health coverage, to ensure that no one is deprived of access to quality health care because of their socioeconomic status. This was also a key sustainable development goal put forward by the UN. The Act seeks to achieve universal health coverage by creating one public health fund, the NHI Fund, with adequate resources to plan for and effectively meet the health needs of the entire population. According to the National Department of Health, the NHI Act will be phased in gradually, using a progressive approach based on resource availability. Under the NHI Act, the NHI Fund would be the core purchaser and provider of medical services and medicines. Registered healthcare users would be entitled to medical care and medicine from accredited service providers. Health service providers would decide on treatment and referrals to specialists, and they would be reimbursed by the NHI Fund. NHI would also decide annually what the applicable payment rates would be for healthcare service providers. However, concerns about the Act's constitutionality and viability persist. It seeks to limit the cover offered by private medical schemes, which infringes on their right to access healthcare. It proposes additional tax burdens on an already shrinking tax base, requiring an additional 200 billion rand in taxes, according to some government estimates. Importantly, the National Treasury, the Davis Commission, and the Minister of Finance have all stated that the scheme is unaffordable. In fact, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana also said it is unaffordable and that the proposed financing sources are unsustainable as far back as 2023. Healthcare service providers have threatened to leave the country should the NHI become law. This is a loss in skills that the country cannot afford, as well as one that will further contract the shrinking tax base. The NHI is directed primarily towards basic and emergency healthcare. The F.W. de Klerk Foundation pointed out last year that by prioritizing primary care and centralizing healthcare provision, the NHI risks neglecting those with rare diseases, leaving them without adequate support or access to essential treatments. This approach not only fails to address their unique healthcare concerns, but also undermines the private sector without ensuring sufficient enhancements to the public healthcare system. The NHI's framework, which positions the state as the sole purchaser of healthcare, exacerbates concerns surrounding sustainability because it also diminishes the role of medical aides, who are vital employers in the country. We would be remiss to not point out the risks that this poses, which further undermine the small fiscal tax base. The vast disparity between South Africa's private and public healthcare sectors highlights a critical issue. Unfortunately, the current framework proposed by NHI threatens to exacerbate this gap rather than bridge it. Then, there was also the second Presidential Health Compact, which was signed in August of 2024. The compact commends stakeholders to establish a unified, integrated, and responsive healthcare system for the entire population. Its aim was to involve the private sector to strengthen governance and improve oversight of the healthcare system. Shifting focus to everyone's right to sufficient food and water. The South African Food Security Index for 2024 found food insecurity reached its highest level in over a decade. According to a survey from the Human Sciences Research Council, 63% of households in South Africa face food insecurity, with hunger and malnutrition plaguing families, many with children under the age of 5. Rising food prices, poverty, and high unemployment have made it increasingly difficult for families to afford nutritious meals. I would be remiss if I did not point out that the food poverty line was around 700 Rand per person per month in 2024, but the child support grant was only 510 Rand a month. A report on child malnutrition from the South African Human Rights Commission detailed the food insecurity of children in the Eastern Cape, one of the poorest provinces in the country. Children are especially vulnerable to the effects of malnutrition, such as stunted cognitive development or effects of undernutrition and obesity from dependence on low-cost, high-caloric, and low-nutrient staples. In fact, 25% of children's growth is stunted. Here, the United Nations Children's Fund, also known as UNICEF, found that less than 21% of children receive a minimum acceptable diet. The Public Affairs Research Institute, commonly known as PARI, also found that the cost of water for the average 4-person household in 2024 was around 400 Rand a month. Yet a quarter of households live on less than 3,000 Rand a month. Additionally, there were frequent interruptions in the water services, such as the 11-day suspension across extensive areas in Johannesburg in early 2024, to the disadvantage of residents in the city. Thus, water was both unaffordable and insufficient for many households. Concerning everyone's right to social security, changes in the distribution of grants from the South African Social Security Agency, otherwise known as SASSA, led to distress for recipients. A key issue was the phased withdrawal of cash distribution by Postbank and post offices, with many SASSA grant recipients failing to receive payment from these locations. This move by SASSA was carried out to deter cash in transit heists and reduce stress on the struggling post office. Changes in cash distribution and poor communication about these changes made access to grants difficult for beneficiaries. If you look at your human rights dashboard in your printout, you will see that in 2023, healthcare, food, water, and social security received an E grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was very bad in 2024. It was awarded an E-, that is, very bad and deteriorating, due to the enactment of NHI, food insecurity reaching its highest level in over a decade, the cost of water, and the confusion surrounding the distribution of SASSA grants. Turning to children's rights, Section 28 of the Constitution protects children's rights, which expressly include, amongst other things, the right to a name and nationality from birth, basic nutrition, shelter, basic healthcare services, and social services. Let's first consider children's right to name and nationality from birth. A birth certificate is a child's proof of citizenship and allows them to access Social Security grants and other rights. In March 2024, nearly 200,000 fewer infants were receiving the grants than in March 2020, when South Africa went into lockdown. This is very concerning, given the fact that we have a growing population. According to UNICEF, only 76 to 90% of South Africa's births are registered. This is without considering the problem of invisible children, those who are prevented from obtaining a birth certificate because they do not have the required documentation, but they may have other documentation to prove their birth and that of their mother's identities. Considering children's rights to basic nutrition, malnutrition also remains critical in South Africa, with UNICEF reporting that severe childhood poverty affects 23% of children. UNICEF also found that child poverty is at 62%, being the highest in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. Children outside metropolitan municipalities were twice as likely to live in multidimensional poverty than those living in the metros. In 2023, children's rights received a D- grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was poor and deteriorating. Due to the aforementioned factors, as well as others listed in the report, in 2024 it was awarded an E grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was very bad. Reflecting on education, Section 29 states that everyone has the right to basic and further education. This includes the right to receive an education in an official language of their choice. In 2024, South Africa achieved a historic matric pass rate of 87%, the highest pass rate in South Africa's history, and almost 5% increase from 2023's 82%. Of those who passed, 47% qualified for admission to bachelor's studies. The Department of Basic Education has also made significant progress in promoting the use of indigenous languages at schools, with proposed expansion of the successful Eastern Cape mother tongue-based bilingual education model nationwide. In this model, learners are taught other subjects such as math and natural science in their mother tongue. Statistically, learners who are taught using their home language in the first 6 years of schooling fare better than those who are not. Additionally, after the 18th Amendment of the Constitution comes into effect, South African Sign Language will be included as an official language. However, the date for this is yet to be set by the President. When talking about education, one has to consider the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act 2024. Commonly known as the Bella Act, the law was assented to by the President on 13th September 2024 and commenced operation in December 2024. The Bella Act criminalizes parents with up to 12 months imprisonment should they fail to enroll their child from grade R. It is concerning that criminalizing parents is the one solution. This is likely to disproportionately impact socioeconomically vulnerable families. The Bella Act also grants the state powers to override decisions made by parents via the school governing bodies, including admissions and language policies, and may lead to less parental involvement in school governance. This centralizes powers away from parents and schools, local communities, and moves it towards the state, losing many of the gains made for parents in schools after democracy. The act may also potentially diminish the responsiveness of schools to the specific needs and preferences of their local communities. Turning to consider budget cuts in education, several provincial education departments made significant structural changes to cope with severe cuts in their education budgets in 2024. The Western Cape was in the spotlight because of its decision to reduce the number of educator posts as a result of a 3 billion rand budget cut. This crisis was further compounded by the national government's decision to not fully fund the 2023 wage agreement, leaving the province to cover 36% of the shortfall. KwaZulu-Natal was unable to afford 11,000 educator posts due to the staggering 4 billion rand in budget shortfalls. Mpumalanga faced a pressure of 876 million rand, and Northwest was grappling with a 400 million rand gap. Minister Gwarube said the roots of the fiscal crisis were poor policy choices and a stagnant economy. In 2023, the right to basic and further education received an E- grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was very bad and deteriorating. In 2024, it was graded a D. This is an improvement from the previous year and was founded on the fact that the positive developments were significant, particularly the fact that the matric results improved from the previous year. The final right that I will consider is property rights. Section 25 of the Constitution protects the right to property. Reflecting on expropriation, we see that the Constitution outlines two conditions for the expropriation of property in terms of law of general application. First, it must be in the public purpose or in the public interest. Second, it must be subject to just and equitable compensation. The Expropriation Act 2024 states that it was assented to by the President on 20th December 2024. The Act allows for nil compensation to be considered just and equitable, where land is expropriated in the public interest, giving regard to all relevant circumstances. Importantly, these relevant circumstances are not a closed list type of land that can be expropriated for nil compensation. This raises the possibility that further circumstances can arise where nil compensation may be paid. The F.W. de Klerk Foundation believes the Act to be unconstitutional because, amongst other things, it is contrary to the rule of law, as it is not rationally connected to achieving a legitimate purpose. This is because the 2017 High-Level Panel on the Assessment of Key Legislation and the Acceleration of Fundamental Change concluded that the lack of funding was not the cause of the slow and failed pace of land reform. Rather, the report found the causes to be a lack of political will, corruption, and a reverting back by the state to an apartheid-style state stewardship and elite capture. Despite the Act not yet being in force, there is the concern that it might lead to increased land invasions, as it could be perceived as a signal that property rights will not be protected by the state. This is especially a concern for urban areas as people migrate to cities, because those invading land often disregard court rulings. In 2023, property rights received a D grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was poor. In 2024, it received a D- grade, indicating that its full enjoyment was poor and deteriorating. This was due to the Expropriation Act coming into law. The fact that the Expropriation Act was not yet operational led to the right retaining a poor grade as opposed to being downgraded to an E. Thank you so much for your kind attention. This concludes the in-depth analyses of some of the rights that are most threatened. I will now hand over to Christo, who will provide the concluding remarks for today's launch.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for that very insightful analysis. And ladies and gentlemen, I think what is important is the fact that all of these things affect all of us. As we sit here, people from various backgrounds, it's so important that South Africans find common purpose, that we unite as a nation to help overcome these challenges that we face. Now imagine, within 2 years from now, all of these little blocks that you see, some painted in red, some in yellow, some in dark green, lighter green, orange. Imagine all of these blocks be painted deep green. Right? Then it means something. What is more important is that, how do we get to that? How do we get to that sort of outcome? If we can work together as a nation and focus less on the noise, but focus on the real issues that affect our people, I think then we will be able to, when we look back, to say that we have really achieved what we set out to do, and that is to make the Constitution a reality for everyone. But if you look at the rights that are in red, you can translate that back to the state of our economy. South Africa's fiscally constrained position continued to severely impact the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms for its citizens. You have no doubt from what was said by the Constitutional Rights Program team that inclusive economic growth is an absolute necessity for South Africa's constitution to become a reality for all. We need to increase the number of taxpayers. Currently, we have approximately 7.4 million taxpayers for a population of 60 million people. And when I state this, I'm not discounting the contribution through VAT and other means of taxes. But what SARS states in its report, these are the taxpayers that are required to submit their tax returns on an annual basis. Our country has once again arrived at a stage in its history where it is no longer an option for South Africans to agree to disagree. Without the job creation that results from economic growth, the number of taxpayers, the number of companies that to contribute to the tax base will remain low, and the government's resulting revenue too small to adequately address the needs of its 60 million people. We've seen budget cuts for education, budget cuts in all other sectors, and this have a negative impact on rights. Without job creation that results from economic growth, income inequality, food insecurity, etc., will only remain and continue to negatively affect the South Africans' dignity, equality, and other rights and freedoms. And something that I want to add is that we need to look at what are the factors that undermine economic growth. I think it's Einstein that said, if you continue to do the same thing over and over again, or the definition of insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again and then expect a different result. And perhaps that is something that we have to indulge. As a former education and school principal myself, I find it important to point out that despite the amount that we spend on education, it's important to note that poor outcomes still remain. As pointed out by the Constitutional Rights Program team, our biggest expenditure in our national budget is on education, but 81% of grade 4 learners could not read with real understanding. UNICEF also observed recurring trends of deprivation regarding education. When it comes to further education, we need to rethink the way NSFAS as an institution is constituted. The initial idea was that students, once they complete their studies, once they get a job, they will have an additional tax. That tax will come back to NSFAS to ensure the long-term sustainability of NSFAS. Whether that is still practical, whether that idea is still in the minds of people who are responsible for NSFAS, that remains to be seen. But we are heading for serious trouble because the amount of money that we make available to NSFAS, over the long term is not sustainable. We've seen changes in terms of the board of NSFAS, the changes in terms of management, and hopefully we will see a better administered program, because high levels of corruption, high levels of incompetence has really had a negative impact on many of those who were supposed to benefit from this source. So, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that a multi-pronged approach must be adopted instead of merely increasing the amount of money taxpayers spend on education. One such prong should be to properly skill and support school principals who are charged with running schools and supervising teachers. Properly run schools where teachers are required to show up to class on time and teach well, or face the consequences, will go a long way to address the problems of the education sector faces. The high levels of absenteeism at many schools, where teachers are not present in their classes, where valuable time that should be used to teach those kids knowledge, skills, etc. That time is wasted because there's a lack of accountability. Hold teachers, hold principals accountable for the standard of education that they actually should provide. It's also important to note that, and what we've seen during this previous budget planning cycle, because the state has run basically out of money, we start to target specific sectors. For example, want to increase VAT. We want to find money from other sources, especially the reserve fund. To what extent will that eventually catch up with government? If we do not, as a populace, as a nation, start holding politicians accountable for the decisions they make, it will eventually lead to an implosion of the entire economic system. Because you can tax people only to a certain point. And if you've run out of all of those resources within the Reserve Bank, within other state institutions, what do you do then? So, esteemed guests, dignitaries, board members, members of the media, and those joining us online, we are now at the end of our presentation. We have hope that it has achieved its purpose, namely to enable you to pause and reflect on the bigger picture of how we as a nation are doing in our endeavors to advance the human rights and freedoms in the Constitution. To question how we as a nation is doing in terms of building a future of freedom and justice. And then, obviously, to discuss these vital issues with each other, especially in your daily dialogues, in your institutions where you work. Because ultimately, we are a democracy. Freedom of speech is a fundamental cornerstone of our democracy. We have the right to confront, to critically engage, to debate, and at the end of the day, to come to a conclusion that will benefit the greater good. We will now allow the opportunity for you to ask questions, and then after this we will have some nice refreshments, and you're also welcome to take a tour inside the building. Just be careful when you go up the stairs, hold on to the railing, because it's a bit slippery. But be it as it may, thank you very much. Right. Let me see if there are any particular questions that anyone would like to ask. As Danielle has said, the full report, if you scan the QR code, you will be able to access the full report. That's approximately almost 60 pages, I think. Hardworking young people. As you can see, young people, and we do not discount the older people like myself, but it's important that we empower young people to take the reins and to lead the future. So, any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yes.
I don't have a question. I'd just like to add a comment. As local government representing the City of Cape Town, I think the lack of ethics and accountable governance at local government level leads to a great violation of human rights. Yeah. And I think that should be exposed more, where we have 257 local municipalities with only 37 being able to achieve accountable audits. And so that is where the City of Cape Town is busy with. And then just something that I'd like to pick up as well is where we look at the economic opportunities, where we do not embrace good governance and support examples of good governance, and where the City of Cape Town is constantly making proposals for the improved harbour, functionalities, and we've heard that the Deputy President said privatisation and cooperation is not a swear word. We maintain that explore those avenues, because that is how we will stimulate the economy.
Absolutely. Yeah. From which municipality are you?
Can you not guess, sir?
Okay, sorry.
Cape Town.
Okay, any other questions? Any other comments? Over there? You're welcome.
It's Mlamli from SABC News. I'm just listening to your concluding remarks, talking about holding politicians accountable. I'm wondering, sitting here, based on the provisions on the section of the Constitution, I think it's section 27, the basic rights, Daniela, you can help us here as well. Access to food, clothes, shelter, transport, those that kind of arrangement. Is there a provision that can maybe the courts can pronounce on this, maybe via class action, so that by a certain date, these basic human rights are accessed to the taxpayers and the paying public?
Thank you very much. Very insightful question. And obviously, one has to follow the trajectory in terms of how do they get appointed. All starts with an election, obviously. And how do you then build the capacity amongst those who are eligible to, elect the right people in the right positions, to empower them with the right knowledge? But that is not your question. I'm just saying that's the starting point. In terms of the application of law, Delana, if you can assist.
I was told to come to the podium and speak into the microphone to answer questions. So, Malenge, right? Mlamli. Okay. Thank you. If we look at Section 195 of the Constitution, it actually sets out what we should expect from an open, responsive, accountable, transparent government, and it sets out good governing principles there. So I would state that if we actually not only help the politicians to account, but help the bureaucrats, who are the ones that stay in government departments, who are responsible for doing these daily things, if we held them to account, made sure that, I heard it from someone else the other day, that if government would only be run as clean and neat as a business, where you have key performance indicators annually, and if you fail to make those or meet those key performance indicators, that would be reflected. Where being a bureaucrat won't be something that you can take for granted if that you would keep your job if you didn't perform. I think that would go a long way. But again, for citizens to actually make sure that the government meets these needs. And again, as Christo said, information, and that's why we took such pains with painting the economic and budgetary context. Because until you realize, like, wow, exactly how much money the state has loaned from other countries. And for example, I was practicing my speech with my Uber driver on the way here, and he was saying to me that in Zambia, China had taken over the national airport, because that's what happens. You loan money, you can't pay money back, you give a key national asset. So I think if we actually look at KPIs and running government clean and neat, the bureaucracies, to make sure they stand up to Section 195, and also Section 1, which talks about a clean, open, responsive, and accountable government, we would go a long way. For citizens to know what their rights are and how government should be run, what the context is, which is why we said it's so important for these things to continuously be in our media dialogue. What is government's responsibility with this? What does the Constitution say in Section 9 about clean government? Is it happening? Whose heads are rolling? I mean, have there been any prosecutions to date about state capture? No. And those are really, really big problems. And yet we're the ones who face the consequences. Another suggestion I had from someone else I was discussing this with was that, well, maybe cabinet ministers shouldn't be allowed to seek private services. So they should not have private healthcare. They should not have private security. They should sit with the access to the services that South Africans sit with, especially if it's their responsible portfolio. But yeah, Christo?
If you just look at the founding provisions of our Constitution, it says that South Africa is a sovereign democratic state founded on the following values. I'm not going to read the first ones, but the last one says the following: we should have a multi-party system of democratic government to ensure accountability, to ensure responsiveness and openness. And I think that are very, very critical in terms of exactly what you are saying. Is there a possibility for class action based on the fact that these fundamental constitutional building blocks are not adhered to? We also have academics here. I think Professor Esop over here, I've heard even the other morning on Eris here, outlining the challenges that we have with budget and with the economy and so forth. Perhaps if you can share maybe your thoughts on the fundamental problem that we have with the economy. Is it possible?
Hello everyone, and thank you for putting me on the spot. Obviously unprepared, but as a typical lecturer, once I start, I won't necessarily stop. So I'm just warning all of you in advance. So just in terms of the economy, we are obviously in a really precarious position. And I think the minister has outlined some of this in his budget speech. But I think fundamentally, when it comes to our fiscal relations, it's not an issue of not having enough revenue. I think we should put that idea aside. For an economy that's been performing poorly for the past dozen years, where we've been growing less than 1% on average, where unemployment is currently at a relatively low point of the past 15 years at 32%, we're actually still generating revenue of over 2.2 trillion rand a year. That's a large sum of money. Our tax to GDP ratio is roughly 26% using 2022 data, which compares to which countries? It compares to countries like Scandinavia, Denmark, the UK, etc., etc. The issue really lies on the expenditure side, which is why I appreciated the question from the gentleman from the SABC, because what are we doing with that revenue from a government side? How are we spending that money? And specifically, how does that spending encourage more economic growth, higher levels of equality? How does that spending lead to lower levels of unemployment? And in that area, I'm sad to say we have failed as a government, and unfortunately at all spheres of government, truly, for various reasons. So what does this mean for the greater economy? It means that the government is not really pushing economic growth. Okay, where is economic growth going to come from? From the private sector. And most macroeconomists will tell you that economic growth essentially comes from the private sector, but government has an important function in setting up a environment where economic growth can thrive. That is the first and foremost duty. And then if you are a developmental state like we do, we can intervene in several different means, like has been done in several countries, the East Asian countries being probably the best example, or Scandinavian countries being great examples of then intervening at a greater level. But we just failing utterly in that regard. I'm not quite sure if I've assisted Christo, but that's my 5 cents for the moment. Thank you so much for indulging me.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed, eye-opening. So, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions, perhaps over there?
Since with the education and I'm Taro Billinger from ECT. I'm just a student. But I wanted to ask necessarily with government, since there's been obviously a deterioration and like more poor report cards of the education and children, and a lot of the government's necessarily allocated funds are going to allocated to education. Does that mean that there's more open opportunity for more private, which is citizens, and private partnerships, which is with corporations and obviously foundations, where they are the ones that are able to bridge those gaps between necessarily providing the needs for children in education and everything? Because I've seen a lot of schools, especially in informal areas and townships, the children don't even have chairs or tables to sit on, which then, what you were saying, Daniela, that if the grade 4s cannot even read, there's a huge statistics that grade 4s in South Africa cannot even understand reading. How would they be able to if they cannot even sit on chairs and everything? So would you think that there's more opportunity for those private public partnerships there? Because government obviously isn't bridging those gaps.
I mean, I spent 20 years in education, became a school principal. When I left education, they asked me to go and train principals. I went to the Eastern Cape. I worked in collaboration with University of Fort Hare. Traveled to many of those schools in far desolated areas. The most beautiful people, the most beautiful children. Sadly though, the schools were so dilapidated. Some of the schools didn't even have roofs, pit latrines. And then you get the private sector to come in, but they are the need is so big that, private sector can only assist with a couple of schools. So I think there's a lot of those interventions happening and a lot of assistance from the private sector. But if the private sector doesn't grow, if your bottom line is not increased and you have less and less money to do those CSI projects, then you will not get very far. And that's our dilemma. And then secondly, what should be the focus be? Artificial intelligence, I've just read a study where they say a lot of jobs are going to be obsolete. Luckily, AI cannot replace me, so thank Lord for that. But it also can't tell jokes on the spot. But be that as it may, if we do not, adapt our curriculum and bring in new ways of, addressing the needs of the future, then we set them up for failure. There won't be any jobs for them. So I think a whole rethink and a whole new way of dealing with the future is important. But it's all of us that must take that responsibility on our shoulders. And that's what we as a foundation emphasize all the time. South Africans must come together, must really embark on a journey together to resolve the issues that confront us up to today. We've started in 1994. What a momentous occasion was it when we all went to vote for a new government. What a momentous occasion it was when we, sort of supported the first Springbok team in the first World Cup. So we had these momentous occasions. Even the formation of the GNU, hopefully, was a momentous occasion. But we live in a world which is so much in turmoil that one can easily get trapped into the noises, on the world of noise, as opposed to the world of focused endeavors, focused, collaboration, because that is what South Africa at this point needs. Trader?
Thanks, Krista, and I want to say thanks for the team for what are really putting together in their research. This report card, it's most of the facts that we heard, the things we knew about, and that we've been worrying about for years and so on. But it was interesting to have it all together like this. But to me, knowing that, I mean, you spoke about a possible class action. What is it that civil society can do? That some of the big foundations can get together and some others can get together, and it would be even religious groups, but any in civil society, so that we can try to get an initiative instead of talking and worrying about these things that all of us do. And there's the middle of the road of the people who, I always think it's about 60% people of all races that are the kind of the middle of the road, but we are so disappointed about how things have gone. We're not far right and we're not far left, but how can we activate that group to really keep the politicians and the officials accountable? Because the responsibilities of where the problems are really would lie with much of that would lie with government. But how can we play a more active role and get action going instead of talking?
But it's also our understanding of democracy. People assume when you go and vote every 5 years, you've done your job. That's what democracy is all about. Democracy is not just voting every 5 years and now we sit back and wait on politicians to do the work. Democracy means when you leave this building, you go and you're an active participant, whether it's in the school governing body, whether it's in the municipal IDP process, whether it's being part and parcel of community engagements, etc. It's continuous action that really gives value to democracy. But yeah, my wife always say that you're full of talk, but start cutting the grass. And that's what we should focus on. Any other comments, ladies and gentlemen? Dominique?
Someone behind you?
Yeah. Oh, please go ahead.
From Ukrainian Association
Yeah,
of
welcome.
South Africa. Thank you. Thanks for painting this rather sad story, and it's not the first time that you are measuring, right, this report. What would be your next steps? Are you going to communicate this to the government, or what are your plans? And also, do you plan to assess how human rights issues also correspond to the foreign policy approach?
No, thank you very much. I think Daniela team obviously engaged with government, making it available to the South African Human Rights Council. That's the first starting point, making it available to other, I think, Section 9 institutions, Chapter 9, sorry, also making it available to government institutions, and yes, engage via the media to say, but we are concerned South Africans. We want to see things change for the better, for all South Africans. That's the core message. Yeah. Anything else? Oh yes, then we have a July conference later this year. Also, other conference where we bring in top specialists to come and engage further on this. But yeah, obviously, we do not want this just to be a theoretical exercise. We want to see it really making a difference in the lives of people out there. Dominique, enigiets daar van jou kant af?
Well, I just thank everybody who worked on this report. Very enlightening and giving many good perspectives on everything that's happening in our country. It all points to the necessity of our national dialogue.
Absolutely.
If we are going to fail having a thorough, profound dialogue about all these issues, we're going to fail big. Because the underlying assumption of the Constitution, I always believe, is that there is a strong cohesion built around the values of the Constitution. And as I'm looking at the Constitution, the situation currently, we lack cohesion. And the relationship between group and grid, if the group is strong, the grid, the value system will be strong, stronger. The stronger the group, the stronger the value system. I'm very sure that we need this dialogue very urgent.
Absolutely. Ismail, just step forward quickly, just a minute for you as well. Just tell us about where we are with the national dialogue.
Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Ismail Jusuf. I stand as the Manager of Constitutional Advancement at the F.W. de Klerk Foundation. Now, something really caught my ear in listening to this entire talk, or let me say dialogue, go on. And that was exactly the sentiments that Domini just raised now. Now more than ever, South Africa needs a national dialogue. And this national dialogue should truly indeed be national. And it serves two purposes for me, in my opinion specifically. The first thing is that the national dialogue gives power back to the people, gives power back to the citizens. And how we envisage it is that the national dialogue, contrary to popular belief, is not a one-day event. It's going to be rolled out on a local, on a regional, on a sectoral, on a provincial, on a national level. The aim of it is to influence policy, yes, but also to bring the concerns of the citizens to the government. That's the one thing. But the second thing, and why it's incredibly important, ladies and gentlemen, is because earlier a question was asked on how we can take class action. Well, the national dialogue gives us the vehicle to collectively take action and responsibility to hold those in government accountable, which is indeed what the Constitution calls for. As to where we are, not just in the national dialogue process, but where the F.W. de Klerk Foundation stands, I think the F.W. de Klerk Foundation is one of the first civil society organizations, one of the first legacy foundations to heed the call for a national dialogue. And we did so for the constitutional purpose of giving voice back to the people. We got involved, I believe, in July last year, and we've made tremendous headway ever since. As of now, we formed a steering committee. We have a variety of subcommittees or working committees under the steering committee. The steering committee is made up of various legacy foundations, and the working committees are filled with various civil societies, and these include things like public mobilization and fundraising. We've engaged extensively with the presidency, and I'm happy to account to you today that the presidency is on board with this endeavor. They've endorsed this endeavor, and they've also agreed to fund a large part of this endeavor. So tremendous headway has been made. We'll be hosting a national convention. It's planned for sometime during the middle of this year, wherein these structures will be formalized, and the actual process of going to the ground, to putting theory into practice, and to getting the voices of citizens heard starts, those local and regional dialogues that I spoke of. And so it's tremendously exciting times ahead for South Africa. It's absolutely necessary and critical. And why? Because when we look at the state of the nation today, we find that in light of misinformation and disinformation that have sown seeds of discord amongst our populace, we need the voices of all South Africans to be heard. Not a single South African should be left out, and the F.W. de Klerk Foundation is incredibly proud and happy and optimistic to get behind this endeavor. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I presume that's the last question. Any more? If there is not, please let me just see where we are on the program. We will now have snacks and drinks outside on the stoop. Here inside, please enjoy and walk around and enjoy what we try to offer in terms of the exhibition. But Christina, as the Vice Chairperson, thank you for your presence and guidance. Also to our interns and Daniela for all the hard work that you have done. We really appreciate that. Then, where is Abigail and Brenda? They have really assisted in terms of the marketing, the program. As you can see, Daniela has, Abigail has designed this front page, and yeah, we have then suggested, this and that and the other, but ultimately all of these things are produced by the wonderful young people that we have present here. And also, thank you, our fellow board member, Dr. Luther, thank you for your presence here today. And then also people from the various embassies, guests, the media, thank you. We really appreciate your presence. Enjoy our company further. Okay.